The Sonari homeworld was a world of peace and beauty, but that peace was shattered in an instant. Seismic eruptions tore through the planet, splitting continents apart. The skies darkened as ash and debris choked the atmosphere, and vast oceans boiled from the heat of the planetary core, spilling over once thriving cities. The Sonari, a fragile race with no means of escaping their world, could do nothing but watch as their civilization crumbled around them. They were a peaceful people, unprepared for such a disaster, relying on their beliefs in harmony and the goodwill of others. But goodwill was in short supply in the galaxy. The powerful races of the galaxy, with their advanced technology and immense fleets, could see the destruction unfolding in real time. Their vast observational networks and probes captured every detail, from the first tremors to the rising death toll. But no one moved. No ships were dispatched. No aid was offered. To them, the Sonari were insignificant. They possessed no valuable resources, no military strength, and their quiet existence meant little to the galactic powers who only valued what could be exploited. The Sonari were written off as collateral damage in the broader, colder calculation of galactic politics. In a quiet, dimly lit chamber, representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species convened. The fate of the Sonari was mentioned almost in passing, an afterthought in a larger discussion on trade routes and territorial disputes. One species suggested that their advanced rescue technology could be deployed to save the Sonari, but the idea was quickly dismissed. What would be the point? They were a pacifist race, incapable of offering anything in return. Another representative, cloaked in the robes of authority, flatly stated that it would be a waste of resources to help such a weak species. Each of the powers around the table agreed. Why intervene when there were no alliances to be made, no territories to gain, no profits to secure? It was not cruelty, but cold pragmatism. The galaxy had far more pressing concerns. As their discussions moved on, the Sonari were forgotten, their cries for help left unheard. To those in power, they were a footnote in the grander scheme of galactic affairs. On the dying Sonari world, the situation grew more desperate by the hour. The planet's crust fractured further, sending quakes rippling through the remaining cities. The Sonari leaders, desperate to protect their people, sent out calls for aid across every frequency, hoping someone, anyone, would hear them. But their pleas echoed into silence. Their once peaceful streets were now filled with panic, families torn apart by the chaos, and the air thick with fear. The Sonari, who had lived without the need for weapons or armies, now found themselves defenseless against the merciless force of nature. They had no ships capable of leaving the planet, no technology to stop the seismic activity, and no allies willing to help. Their belief in the kindness of others was fading as quickly as their world was collapsing. For the first time in their long history, they felt truly alone. But on the fringes of the galaxy, far from the halls of power, someone was listening. Humanity, a species still relatively new to the galactic stage, received the Sonari distress call. On a distant outpost, human commanders and diplomats reviewed the message. Unlike the more established galactic powers, the humans didn't see the Sonari as a calculation of worth. They didn't evaluate them by their military or economic value. They saw a helpless race on the brink of extinction. The human leaders convened, and while the decision wasn't without risk, it wasn't one they could turn away from. Helping the Sonari wouldn't offer humanity any immediate advantages, but that didn't matter. They couldn't stand by and let a species die when they had the means to intervene. To them, it wasn't about what they could gain, but about what was right. Despite knowing they might face opposition or scorn from other races, humanity decided to act. Ships were prepared, teams were assembled, and within hours, a mission was underway. The rescue mission was not designed to be a tactical triumph or a show of force. It was a moral obligation. The human crew, made up of military officers, engineers, and medics, knew that their mission wouldn't bring them glory or reward. There would be no strategic gain, no alliance forged with a powerful species. They weren't doing this to further humanity's standing in the galaxy. The mission was simple: to save lives. Despite being outnumbered by other galactic powers and without any support from the major species, the human crew pushed forward. The decision had been made, not by any grand council, but by people who understood the value of life, regardless of political or material considerations. In the dim light of the command center, key figures debated the logistics. The risks were enormous. The planet was on the verge of collapse, and entering such unstable conditions could result in catastrophic losses. But every time someone voiced a concern, it was met with the same resolve. We have to try. Captain Lin, a seasoned military leader, stood firm, flanked by the mission's chief engineer, Novak, and diplomat Reyes. Each understood their role clearly. They were not there to win a battle or claim territory. They were there to show what humanity could do when faced with a moral imperative. They were there to prove that compassion was a force just as powerful as any weapon. Humanity approached the mission differently from how other species might have. Where some would have calculated the cost-benefit ratio or waited until conditions were more favorable, humans operated with urgency and adaptability. They didn't have time for debates or analysis paralysis. The Sonari didn't have time. Their flexible approach allowed for quick, decisive action. Instead of waiting for the perfect scenario, they developed an on-the-fly rescue strategy, using whatever resources they had. Human ingenuity thrived under pressure, as it always had. As the ships prepared for descent, the crew ran checks on their advanced life support technology. The conditions on the Sonari homeworld were deteriorating rapidly, oxygen levels dropping, seismic activity increasing by the hour. Instead of relying on standard protocols, human engineers modified their landing crafts with adaptive shielding and reinforced hulls, ensuring that they could withstand the unpredictable environment. It wasn't the first time humans had operated in hostile conditions, and their ability to innovate in the face of danger set them apart from the other species that had dismissed the Sonari as a lost cause. Once the landing sequence began, it became clear just how dire the situation was. The planet was barely holding together. Massive storms raged across the surface, and the ground itself seemed to shift beneath them as the tectonic plates buckled under the strain of the planetary collapse. Visibility was low, and navigation was nearly impossible. Yet, the human pilots expertly maneuvered through the chaos, their training and instincts taking over. Even as the terrain shifted, they adjusted, adapting to the ever-changing dangers in real time. Every decision was a life-or-death call, but not once did they falter. Upon landing, the sheer devastation became apparent. Entire cities had been swallowed by the earth, and where there had once been lush landscapes, there were now only craters and dust-filled air. The Sonari, huddled in small, broken groups, were barely surviving. They had no shelter from the storms, no technology to protect themselves from the quakes that shook the ground beneath their feet. The sight of the human ships descending was something they had never imagined. They had long since given up hope that anyone would come. The first contact between the humans and the Sonari was brief but profound. As the humans began their rescue operations, the Sonari looked on in disbelief. These strange beings, who they had never known, were risking their lives to save them. Engineers rushed to set up temporary shelters, while medics distributed emergency rations and medical supplies. The Sonari, exhausted and broken, accepted the help with a mix of gratitude and confusion. Why would anyone do this for them? As the rescue continued, more Sonari were brought to safety. Human medics worked tirelessly, stabilizing the wounded, offering not just medical care but emotional reassurance. They spoke to the Sonari in soft tones, promising that they were not alone, that they wouldn't be left behind. Every time a Sonari looked into a human's eyes, they saw something that had been missing in their darkest hours: hope. Humanity's empathy wasn't just in the physical help they provided but in the way they treated the Sonari with dignity. They weren't a lost cause, nor were they a problem to be solved. They were living beings who deserved a chance to survive, and the humans made sure they understood that. The bond that formed between the two species in those moments was deeper than any alliance of convenience. It was built on shared values and the simple fact that someone had cared enough to come. As the human crew worked tirelessly to evacuate the Sonari, something dark stirred in the void above. Not all the galaxy had ignored the plight of the Sonari for the same reasons. For some, the chaos represented opportunity. Word had spread of the planet's collapse, and now, ships belonging to galactic predators began appearing in the skies. These were the scavengers of the galaxy, pirates, slavers, and ruthless mercenaries, drawn to the scent of easy prey. They had come to exploit the weak, to claim what little the Sonari had left, their people. The Sonari, with no defenses and barely clinging to life, were seen as perfect victims. The predators didn't care about the catastrophe, only about how much profit they could wring from this disaster. The human radar systems pinged with alerts, and the tension rose among the crew as the alien ships closed in. These weren't rescue missions. Humanity knew the look of hostile intent, and the signatures coming from the approaching fleets were unmistakable. Slaver factions and pirate vessels, battle-hardened, heavily armed, and far outclassing the human rescue ships, were on their way. For a moment, a wave of dread washed over the humans. They were vastly outnumbered, their ships designed for evacuation and medical aid, not combat. But backing down wasn't an option. The Sonari, already on the verge of extinction, would be doomed to a fate worse than death if they were captured by these predators. Outgunned, but undeterred, the human commanders devised a plan. Where the predators relied on brute force and overwhelming numbers, humanity leaned into what had always set them apart: ingenuity, adaptability, and their unwavering moral compass. Captain Lin, with decades of tactical experience, quickly formulated a strategy that could level the playing field. They couldn't match the enemy ship for ship, but they didn't need to. Human vessels, smaller and more agile, would rely on guerrilla tactics, using the planet's unstable conditions to their advantage. The environment that had seemed like their greatest enemy could now be a key asset in outmaneuvering the more powerful ships. Humanity's technology, though less advanced in some areas, was nimble and versatile. The engineers aboard made rapid modifications to their ships, enhancing their ability to navigate through the ash-filled skies and erratic storm fronts. They knew the planet better than the incoming forces, having already worked on the ground. Using the planet's violent weather systems as cover, they launched a series of hit-and-run attacks, surprising the enemy with quick, precise strikes. Their tactics were unconventional, but effective. Human pilots flew dangerously close to the planet's surface, skimming over crumbling landscapes and using the natural quakes and magnetic disruptions to confuse enemy sensors. As the Predator's larger ships descended, they found themselves facing not just a determined foe but an unpredictable battlefield. The ground below was treacherous, the skies volatile, and the humans, against all odds, were making it impossible to land clean strikes. The enemy forces, confident in their superior firepower, were forced to adjust to a style of combat they hadn't expected, one where brute strength meant little when your target was always 2 steps ahead. The humans refused to give ground, even as the battle escalated. The rescue effort continued in parallel, with one group of humans focused on evacuating the Sonari while others engaged the enemy in battle. Captain Lin, guiding the combat from the bridge of her ship, made sure that every decision balanced the need to protect the Sonari with the necessity of survival. Tactical retreats were used not as a sign of defeat, but to lure the predators into vulnerable positions. The humans were fighting not just for victory, but for the lives of a species that couldn't fight for itself. The predators, realizing that the humans were more than they had bargained for, increased their assault. Ships equipped with powerful energy weapons began raining fire on the evacuation zones, but the humans held the line. Medics continued their work, ferrying Sonari into the remaining safe zones, while soldiers defended the perimeter. The ground quaked beneath their feet, and the air was thick with dust and fire, but the humans didn't falter. Their ingenuity was matched only by their bravery, as they fought with the knowledge that retreat wasn't an option. The battle raged on, a brutal clash of ideologies as much as firepower. The predators fought for profit, cold and calculating, seeking to take advantage of the vulnerable. The humans fought out of principle, standing between the weak and those who would exploit them. They refused to abandon the Sonari, just as they had refused to let the galaxy's indifference dictate their own actions. After what felt like hours of intense combat, the human forces began to turn the tide. The enemy, though superior in numbers, couldn't match the humans' tactical brilliance and adaptability. One by one, the larger ships began to fall back, realizing that the cost of this raid was far higher than they had anticipated. But the victory didn't come without sacrifice. Several human ships had been destroyed, their crews lost in the defense of the Helpless. As the enemy finally retreated, the battlefield grew quiet. The cost of victory weighed heavily on the survivors. They had won, but at a price. Among the fallen were brave men and women who had given their lives to protect the Sonari. The Sonari, witnessing this selflessness, were forever changed. They had never known such courage, such willingness to sacrifice for another. Humanity's bravery, their refusal to stand down in the face of overwhelming odds, left an indelible mark on the Sonari people. The Sonari, once on the brink of extinction, slowly began to rebuild their lives with humanity's help. The decision was made to relocate those who had survived to a new, safer world, far from the remains of their shattered home. Human engineers and scientists worked alongside the Sonari, helping them settle into a new environment. It wasn't just a matter of providing them with the technology to survive. Humanity knew that their goal wasn't to reshape the Sonari, but to preserve their way of life. The Sonari's peaceful, non-violent nature was something humanity admired, even if it left them vulnerable. The humans didn't impose their military strategies or aggressive tendencies on the Sonari. Instead, they taught them how to use technology to defend themselves passively, how to harness the power of their planet's resources for sustainable living, and how to manage their survival in the vast, indifferent galaxy. The Sonari learned quickly, adapting to the new tools and skills with humility and grace. As the rebuilding process continued, the Sonari's gratitude toward humanity deepened. They had gone from being helpless to hopeful, and it was thanks to those who had risked everything to save them. Across the galaxy, word of the human rescue mission spread rapidly, igniting debates in the halls of power. Species that had once deemed the Sonari insignificant now found themselves questioning humanity's motives. The human intervention wasn't seen as just a noble act, it was an anomaly, something that disrupted the established norms of galactic politics. Why would humans, with no material gain at stake, risk their own lives and resources to save a race that offered nothing in return? To the more pragmatic species, it made no sense. It was seen as a reckless move, an emotional response in a galaxy governed by cold logic. Some, however, saw humanity's actions as a new kind of power. They hadn't simply saved the Sonari. They had reshaped the narrative of what it meant to be a galactic force. The unpredictable nature of human empathy was both inspiring and alarming. For a species used to calculating their every move, this kind of moral courage was difficult to understand, and even harder to predict. While some admired the humans' bravery, others feared that this willingness to intervene could make them dangerous in ways that couldn't be measured by military strength alone. The established powers began to quietly discuss the implications, watching humanity with a new kind of wariness. In the aftermath of the rescue, an unexpected alliance began to form between humanity and the Sonari. The humans had not saved them for any political or strategic advantage, but the bond that had grown in the wake of the disaster was undeniable. The Sonari, once a forgotten race, now found themselves with a powerful ally. They pledged their eternal gratitude, offering what they could in return: cultural wisdom, spiritual insight, and a deep connection to the natural world that few other species had. The humans, in turn, promised to continue their support, ensuring that the Sonari would never again face the galaxy alone. This alliance was not based on power or fear but on mutual respect. The Sonari, while still peaceful, had gained a quiet strength, knowing they had friends who valued them for who they were, not what they could offer. Humanity, for its part, continued to provide military and technological aid, but always with an understanding that they would not impose their ways on the Sonari. The relationship between the two species was a partnership, built on shared values rather than transactional interests. As time passed, the alliance between humanity and the Sonari became a symbol of something greater. It stood for the idea that empathy and compassion could be as powerful as any weapon, that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what you gain but from what you give. Other species, watching from afar, could no longer ignore the humans' influence. They had changed the fate of a people that others had left to die, and in doing so, they had set a new standard for what it meant to be part of the galactic community. In the quiet moments after the conflict, as the Sonari began their new lives, a reflection emerged, one that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity hadn't intervened because they had to, or because it would benefit them. They acted out of empathy, out of a deep-seated belief that life, in all its forms, was worth protecting. This, above all, was what set them apart from the other galactic powers. They didn't seek glory or reward, but in choosing to care when no one else would, they had changed the course of history. The galaxy would never see them the same way again.